My name is Gemma, and growing up, I learned early how to take up as little space as possible. In my family, love was never loud or warm. It was measured, counted, and compared. Somehow, I always came up short. My younger sister, Chloe, did not have to try. She was the golden child. The one my parents bent around without even realizing it. If she wanted something, it was framed as a need. If I wanted something, it was framed as a lesson in independence. I learned to nod, to wait, to swallow disappointment quietly until it tasted like nothing at all. On the outside, we looked fine. Weekend dinners, holiday photos, a family that neighbors described as close. But inside our house, attention moved in one direction, and I learned to survive on leftovers. The only place that ever felt different was my grandparents' house. They lived in a small coastal town, the kind where the air always smelled faintly like salt and pine. Their house sat just far enough from the water that you could hear the waves at night, but still sleep. The porch boards creaked in familiar places. Wind chimes tapped softly when the breeze came in just right. When I was there, no one rushed me. No one compared me. My grandmother listened like every word mattered. My grandfather trusted me, with small responsibilities at first, then bigger ones. Grocery runs, a later bills and payments when they started forgetting things. As they got older, I was the one who showed up consistently, not just for holidays or photos, but on ordinary days, the quiet ones. My parents and Chloe visited too. But mostly when it was convenient, mostly when something needed to be discussed. I did not think much of it back then. I told myself families were complicated, that everyone showed love differently, that keeping the peace was worth the cost. By the time I finished school and walked across that graduation stage, my grandparents were gone, but that house still felt like the last place where I had ever been fully seen. It was my sanctuary. A structure held together not just by nails and wood, but by the lingering safety of people who had actually loved me. That is why when questions about the house started coming up again, 2 months after the funeral, they did not sound innocent to me. They sounded familiar. And for the first time in my life, I did not feel like ignoring that feeling anymore. It began on a Tuesday afternoon. The visit was supposed to be casual, a drop in to see how I was settling in. My mother, Alara, walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking too loudly on the hardwood floors. She did not hug me. She patted my arm, a gesture that felt more like checking for dust than offering affection. Chloe followed, bringing a gust of expensive perfume that warred with the scent of old wood and sea salt. She did not say hello. She stood in the doorway of the living room, her eyes scanning the ceiling, the windows, the floors. She was measuring. I had seen that look before. It was the look she gave a dress she wanted, or a piece of jewelry she felt she deserved. "So, what are you planning to do with the house?" my mother asked. She sat at the kitchen table, stirring her tea slowly. Her eyes fixed on the cup instead of me. Her tone was casual, light the way one might ask about the weather or weekend plans. But the air in the room shifted. It became heavier. "It is a lot of responsibility for one person," my father Marcus added, leaning against the counter. He crossed his arms, his posture relaxed but blocking the exit. "Property taxes are not cheap, Gemma. Maintenance either. You do not want to get overwhelmed." I stood by the sink, gripping a ceramic mug until my knuckles turned white. I knew this script. I had performed in this play 1,000 times. The lines were always the same. They framed their desires as concern. They disguised their greed as protection. Chloe wandered back into the kitchen, trailing a finger along the granite countertop. "You still have all the bills set up?" she asked, smiling. "Utilities, payments, that kind of thing." "I am just curious." I told myself not to read into it. But the feeling in my stomach did not listen. It was a cold, twisting knot of dread. The comments kept coming, always framed as fairness, as family unity. as doing the right thing. It would not be fair for one person to keep everything. Your grandparents would have wanted it shared. We are just trying to help you think long term. I had heard this language before. It was the same tone my parents used whenever something needed to be taken from someone quietly. It was the tone of a negotiation where only one side knew the terms. I looked at them. My mother, studying her tea, as if reading the future in the leaves. My father, radiating a paternal authority that felt more like a threat. Chloe, already redecorating the living room in her mind. They looked at me and saw what they had always seen. Furniture, a prop in their story. Someone who would nod, smile, and fade into the background so the real protagonists could step into the light. I forced the corners of my mouth up. I made myself small. I nodded. I appreciate the concern, I said softly. It is a lot to think about. My mother finally looked up. Her expression softening into something that looked like relief, but felt like victory. Exactly, she said. We just want what is best for you, sweetheart. They left an hour later. I watched their car disappear down the gravel drive, the crunch of tires fading into the sound of the ocean. The house was quiet again. But the peace was gone. The sanctuary had been breached. I stood in the center of the living room, listening to the wind chimes tapping against the porch railing. They sounded frantic now, like a warning. My family thought they had won. They thought I was the same Gemma who accepted scraps and called it a meal. They saw my silence and mistook it for surrender. But, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across the floorboards, I realized something. They were not asking if they could have the house. They were preparing to take it. And for the first time, I was not going to let them. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the rain streaking against the glass of the living room window. The city lights below blurred into streaks of amber and white, a chaotic contrast to the silence inside my chest. I had driven back from the coast on autopilot, my hands tight on the steering wheel, the radio off. The 4-hour drive had given me too much time to think, and now, the silence of my own home felt less like peace, and more like a waiting room. I replayed every conversation from the weekend. I dissected the tone of my mother's voice when she asked about the property taxes. I analyzed the way my father had leaned against the counter, blocking my path, his casual posture betraying a rigid intent. I visualized my sister, Chloe, running her hand along the banister, claiming the space with her touch before she had even claimed it with words. Fairness. Family unity. Responsibility. The words circled in my mind, harmless on their own, but poisonous in the mouths of my parents. I wanted to believe I was being paranoid. I wanted to believe that they were just worried parents and a helpful sister, that their intrusion was clumsy but well-meaning. I wanted to believe that I was the problem, that my defensiveness was just grief talking. But I could not afford the luxury of denial. What finally cracked my hope was not a new realization, but an old memory. It rose from the depths of my mind, sharp and cold. It was 10 years ago. I was 12. Sitting at the dining room table doing homework, while my parents sat across from my Aunt Sarah. Sarah was my father's younger sister, a quiet woman with kind eyes and a nervous laugh. She had just received a settlement from a car accident, a sum of $20,000 that she planned to use for a down payment on a small condo. I remembered the scene with terrifying clarity. My father poured her coffee. My mother sliced a coffee cake. She had baked specifically for the occasion. They were smiling. They were warm. They told Sarah about a business opportunity my father had found, a sure thing that just needed a little capital to get off the ground. They used words like investment and future and trust. We just need a bridge, Marcus had said, his voice dripping with sincerity. 6 months, Sarah. We will pay you back with interest. It is better than letting it sit in a bank. Sarah hesitated. She was not a risk taker. But she loved her brother, And she wanted to be helpful. She wanted to belong. So, she wrote the check. 6 months passed, then 12, then 18. I remembered the day Sarah finally came over to ask for the money back. The warmth was gone. The coffee cake was gone. My parents sat on the sofa, united, while Sarah sat on the edge of the armchair, wringing her hands. "We are a little tight right now," my mother had said, her voice sharp. "You know how hard Marcus has been working. Why are you pressing us?" "I need it for the condo," Sarah whispered. "You promised." Suddenly, the narrative flipped. Sarah was no longer the helpful sister. She was labeled difficult. She was ungrateful. She was greedy. "I cannot believe you are doing this to family," my father had said, shaking his head in performance disappointment. "We open our home to you, and this is how you treat us." Over money. They gaslighted her until she left in tears, apologizing for asking for her own money. They never paid her back. Not a dime. Sarah eventually stopped coming to dinners. She stopped calling. And when her name came up, my parents would sigh and shake their heads, painting themselves as the victims of her selfishness. Sitting in my dark apartment, the parallel struck me with the force of a physical blow. I was Aunt Sarah. The setup was identical. The sudden warmth. The feigned concern. The logical arguments about what was best for the asset. They were not worried about me being overwhelmed by the house. They were worried that if I kept it, they could not liquidate it. They were worried that the asset was sitting in the hands of the daughter they could not control, rather than the one they could. If I tried to argue with them, I would lose. If I tried to explain that I could handle the taxes, that I had a plan, that I was capable, it would not matter. They would shift the goalposts. They would find a new reason why I was unfit. They would call me selfish for hoarding a family retreat. They would call me ungrateful for not sharing the windfall. They would weave a web of guilt so dense I would choke on it. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. Pouring a glass of water just to have something to do with my hands. My reflection in the dark window looked pale, tired, but the fear was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They were banking on the Gemma they knew. The quiet girl who avoided conflict. The girl who would nod and give in just to stop the yelling. They thought they were playing a game against a passive opponent. They thought they had time to wear me down, to chip away at my confidence until I handed them the keys and thanked them for taking the burden. I took a sip of water, the liquid cool against my dry throat. If I played by their rules, I would lose everything. So, I had to change the game. I had to stop reacting and start architecting. I needed to build a wall they could not guilt their way through, a boundary that did not care about their feelings or their manipulation. I did not need a conversation. I needed a lawyer. I set the glass down on the counter with a deliberate clack. I walked over to my laptop and opened it, the screen glowing blue in the darkness. I did not search for family mediators. I did not search for therapists to help me navigate difficult conversations. I typed in 3 specific words. Estate litigation attorney. I scrolled past the flashy ads, past the generic firms that promised quick settlements. I was looking for something specific. I needed someone who understood that estate law was rarely about money and almost always about old wounds. I needed someone who could look at a family tree and see the rot. I found a name near the bottom of the second page. Arthur Vance. The website was sparse, professional, uninviting. No smiling stock photos of happy families. Just a list of credentials and a simple tagline. Protecting your legacy from the unexpected. I clicked on his profile. He looked like a man who did not smile often. A man who preferred statutes to sentiments. He looked like a shark who had decided to swim in a suit. Perfect. I checked the time. It was past midnight, but I did not care. I opened the contact form. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a second. A final hesitation. This was the point of no return. Once I sent this, I was declaring war. It was a silent war, a secret war, but a war nonetheless. I thought of the ocean. I thought of the wind chimes. I thought of my grandfather teaching me how to fix a leaky faucet, while my father sat inside watching television. I thought of the way the house felt like. It breathed when I was the only one there. I typed the subject line. Immediate legal counsel regarding irrevocable trust. I began to type the message, my fingers moving fast, exorcising the ghosts of the past with every keystroke. I laid it out simply. The inheritance. The pressure. The history of financial manipulation. I did not ask for advice on how to talk to them. I asked for a shield. When I hit send, the room felt lighter. The dread that had followed me from the coast began to dissipate, replaced by the humming vibration of a plan set in motion. I closed the laptop. I would see them at dinner on Sunday. I would smile. I would listen to their concerns. I would let them think their strategy was working. I would let them believe the door was unlocked, right up until the moment they walked into the glass. I went to bed, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming. Arthur Vance's office was located on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of floor wax and old paper. It was not a warm space. There were no plants in the waiting room, no magazines about celebrity weddings or golf courses. The walls were lined with beige filing cabinets, and the carpet was a utilitarian gray that seemed designed to absorb sound. It was exactly what I was paying for. I did not want comfort. I wanted a fortress. When I was finally called back, Vance did not stand up to greet me. He was older than his photo online, his hair completely silver. His face mapped with lines of deep concentration. He gestured to a leather chair opposite his desk, which was covered in neat stacks of files. He had printed my email. It sat in the center of the blotter, the only piece of paper that was not perfectly aligned with the edges of the desk. "You were concise," he said, his voice dry and scratching like sandpaper. "I appreciate that. Most people spend the first 20 minutes crying about their childhoods." I sat down, clutching my bag in my lap. "I did not come here to cry, Mr. Vance." He looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses. "No. You came here because you think your family is about to steal your house." Hearing a stranger say it out loud was jarring. It stripped away the layer of family complexity and left only the ugly legal truth. I nodded. "They are escalating. My sister is already acting like she owns it. My parents are talking about my inability to manage the property taxes. They are building a case for incompetence." Vance picked up a pen and tapped it rhythmically against the desk. "It is a common tactic. They create a narrative of necessity. They convince themselves, and eventually, you, that taking the asset is an act of mercy. If they can get you to sign a power of attorney or a quitclaim deed under duress, they win." He opened a folder and slid a document toward me. I had brought him copies of the deed, my grandparents' will, and the probate records. He had clearly already reviewed them. "Your title is clean," he said. "Currently. But if your family believes they are entitled to this property, waiting will only make it easier for them. Entitlement is a powerful drug, Miss Gemma. It makes people bold. It makes them justify things that would otherwise be considered theft." He leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. "You asked about an irrevocable trust." "Yes," I said. "Do you understand what that word means? Irrevocable. It means it cannot be changed," I said. He nodded slowly. "It means more than that. It means you are taking the house and placing it inside a legal vault. Once you sign these papers, the house no longer belongs to you as an individual. It belongs to the trust. You will be the sole trustee, which gives you control, but the ownership is severed. You cannot wake up in a month, feel guilty because your mother cried at a birthday dinner, and decide to give it back. You cannot be guilt-tripped into signing it over, because legally, you do not have the power to give it away on a whim." He paused, letting the weight of the decision settle in the room. It is a nuclear option. It is permanent. It is aggressive. I thought about the way Chloe had run her hand along the banister. I thought about the coffee cake my mother baked for Aunt Sarah before destroying her character. I thought of the silence of the coastal house. The only thing in the world that felt like mine. Do it, I said. Vance did not smile, but the lines around his eyes tightened in approval. He pressed a button on his intercom. Send in the notary. The next 20 minutes were a blur of blue ink and the heavy thud of stamps. The notary was a young woman who did not make eye contact, treating the transfer of my entire legacy with the same detachment as a parking ticket. I signed my name over and over. Each signature felt like I was adding a brick to a wall. With every page I turned, the knot in my stomach loosened, replaced by a strange, cold stability. When the final seal was pressed into the paper, Vance closed the folder. It was a thick, beige file, unassuming and dull. It looked like homework. It looked like nothing. But inside, it contained a legal reality that superseded every emotional manipulation my family could invent. He handed the folder to me. Now, listen to me carefully. I looked up, meeting his steel, gray gaze. The trust is effective immediately. The deed has been transferred. We will file the recording with the county clerk this afternoon. But the most important part of this strategy is not the paperwork. It is the silence. He leaned forward, his voice dropping an octave. Do not tell them. Do not threaten them with this. Do not use it as leverage in an argument. If they know the house is locked away, they might try to challenge your competency before the ink is dry. They might try to physically occupy the property to establish squatter rights. I gripped the folder. So what do? You let them believe the door is open, he said. Let them make their plans. Let them commit to their course of action. If they think you are weak, they will get sloppy. They will overplay their hand. And when they do, they will walk right into this wall at full speed. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. You are not the victim anymore, Gemma. You are the trustee. Act like it. I walked out of the building and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the city afternoon. The noise of traffic washed over me. Horns honking, engines idling, the rush of pedestrians. Usually, the chaos of downtown made me anxious. But today, it felt distant. I looked down at the folder in my hands. It was light, barely heavy enough to notice, yet it held the weight of the entire coast. I hailed a taxi, and as I slid into the back seat, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked the same. Same dark hair, same pale skin, same quiet eyes. But the person looking back at me was different. I had walked into that office as a daughter afraid of disappointing her parents. I walked out as a woman who had just drawn a line in the concrete that could never be erased. I checked my phone. There was a text from my mother. We are thinking of coming by for dinner on Sunday. Chloe has some great ideas she wants to run by you. I stared at the screen. A week ago, this message would have sent me into a spiral of panic. I would have spent hours rehearsing my defenses, trying to find a polite way to say no, and inevitably failing. Now, I just felt a calm, icy resolve. I typed back. That sounds lovely. I will make a roast. I hit send. I was not lying. It would be lovely. I would cook for them. I would pour their wine. I would listen to their ideas about renovating a house they no longer had the power to touch. I would let them smile and plan and measure. Safe in the knowledge that they were already ghosts in a house that belonged to the law. The taxi merged into traffic, and I settled back against the seat, clutching the folder to my chest like a shield. Let them come. I was ready. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in dissociation. I had spent my entire life learning how to fade into the wallpaper, but this was different. Before, my silence had been a survival instinct, a way to avoid the crossfire. Now, it was a weapon. I was not hiding. I was waiting. It started with the Sunday roast. My apartment, usually a quiet refuge, was filled with the smell of rosemary and garlic, and the overwhelming noise of my family. My mother, Elora, had brought a bottle of red wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She poured it with a heavy hand, her bracelets jingling, filling the room with a performative cheerfulness that set my teeth on edge. "This is nice," she said, gesturing around my small living room with a slightly pitiful expression. "Cozy. But honestly, Gemma, imagine how much better this dinner would be on the coast. With the windows open, the sound of the ocean." I sliced the beef, keeping my eyes on the knife. "It would be beautiful," I said evenly. My father, Marcus, grunted in agreement. He was already looking at his phone, scrolling through what I assumed were contractor reviews. He had not asked if he could hire contractors. He just assumed the need existed. "The house needs work," he said, not looking up. "The roof is 20 years old. The siding is taking a beating from the salt. It is a money pit waiting to happen." He looked at me then, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You are not ready for that kind of overhead, Gemma. You have your student loans. You have your career to focus on. We are just trying to be realistic." I placed a slice of roast onto his plate. "I know, Dad. It is a lot to think about." Across the table, my sister Chloe was already living in a future that did not exist. She had brought a tablet and was swiping through digital paint swatches. "I was thinking we should knock down the wall between the kitchen and the dining room," she said, turning the screen so I could see a render of a pristine, soulless white kitchen. "Open concept. It would modernize the whole place. We could host the 4th of July party there next year." She said we. She said host. She did not ask. I looked at the screen. The kitchen she was destroying in her mind was the same one where my grandmother had taught me to knead dough, where my grandfather had sat drinking coffee and watching the birds. It made my chest ache, a sharp, physical pain. But I forced the muscles in my face to remain slack. I forced a small, polite nod. "That is an interesting idea," I said. I had never thought about opening it up. Chloe beamed, mistaking my neutrality for submission. "See? She gets it. We need to maximize the value." For the next 2 hours, I played the part of the overwhelmed, indecisive daughter. I let them talk. I let them plan. I let them believe that my hesitation was born of incompetence rather than strategy. Every time they made a suggestion, I gave them a non-committal answer. "I will look into that. I see your point. That makes sense." They heard yes. They always heard yes, because they never listened closely enough to hear the silence behind the words. When they finally left, the apartment felt contaminated. I locked the door and immediately went to my desk. I opened a fresh notebook, a simple black composition book that I kept hidden in my bottom drawer. I picked up a pen and wrote down the date. Sunday, October 12th. Attendees: Mom, Dad, Chloe. Topic: renovation plans and financial capability. Key phrases used: money pit, overwhelmed, maximize value. Implied intent: Dad is already researching contractors. Chloe believes she has the authority to alter the structure. I documented everything. Every text message, every voicemail, every offhand comment about fairness. I was building a timeline. If they ever tried to claim in court that they had been misled, or that I had verbally agreed to a transfer, I would have a detailed record of their presumption. As the weeks went on, the masquerade became harder to maintain. Their patience was fraying. The concern phase was ending, and the urgency phase was beginning. They started calling me during work hours. My mother would leave voicemails asking if I had called the insurance company yet, offering to do it for me if I just sent over the account number. Chloe sent me links to furniture, asking which sofa I preferred, but implying she had already ordered the one she liked. I gave them nothing. No account numbers. No passwords. No signatures. The tension finally snapped on a Thursday evening. We were at my parents' house this time, a sprawling suburban home that always felt too cold, no matter how high the thermostat was set. We were having coffee in the living room, after a tense dinner where my father had lectured me on the volatility of the real estate market. Chloe set her cup down with a sharp clink. Listen, Gemma. I am going down to the coast this weekend to meet with a landscape architect. The overgrown hydrangeas are a disaster. I need the spare key. She held out her hand, palm up. Expectant, I felt the air leave the room. This was a direct command. It was a physical crossing of the line. If I gave her the key, I was acknowledging her right to access the property. If I refused, I was declaring war before I was ready. I took a sip of my coffee, buying 3 seconds of time. I did not have the key on me. Obviously. But I needed an excuse that fit the character I was playing. The disorganized, overwhelmed Gemma. I lowered the cup. Oh, Chloe, I am so sorry. I totally forgot to get a copy made. Her hand remained extended. What do you mean? You have the master set. Just give me that. I will make a copy myself. I shook my head, adding a touch of flustered embarrassment to my voice. I actually left the master set at the office. I was scanning the keychain tags for my files, and I must have left them on my desk. I will not be back there until Monday. The lie was smooth practiced. Chloe's hand dropped. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. You left the keys to $1 million property on your desk. I shrugged apologetically. I have just been so swamped this week. You know how it is. My mother sighed, a loud, theatrical exhalation of disappointment. See. This is what we are talking about, Gemma. You are scattered. You are not treating this with the seriousness it deserves. My father leaned forward. This is ridiculous. We cannot have the property sitting inaccessible because you are too busy to manage a keychain. We need to consolidate this. I looked down at my lap, acting chastised. I know. I am sorry. I will try to be more organized. I did not offer to mail the key. I did not offer to drive down and let her in. I offered nothing but an apology that cost me nothing. Chloe huffed and crossed her arms, sinking back into the sofa. Fine. I will reschedule the landscaper. But we need to get this sorted out. We cannot keep playing tag with the house. You are right, I said quietly. We cannot. I looked up, and for a second, I met my sister's gaze. She looked annoyed, frustrated, but not suspicious. She thought I was incompetent. She thought I was a mess. She had no idea that while she was scheduling landscapers for a garden she did not own, I was mentally counting down the hours. The trust documents had been recorded weeks ago. The deed was done. The trap was set. I left their house that night with a knot of adrenaline in my chest. The masquerade had worked, but the clock had run out. I could feel the shift in their energy. They were done asking. They were done hinting. The next move they made would not be a conversation. It would be an ambush. And I would be waiting. The phone call that ended the truce came on a Wednesday afternoon. It was raining again, a gray, relentless drizzle that slicked the city streets and made the office feel claustrophobic. I was staring at a spreadsheet, trying to focus on quarterly projections, when my cell phone vibrated against the desk. The sound was a low, angry buzz that cut through the quiet hum of the open plan office. I looked down. The screen lit up with a single word. Mother. My heart hammered against my ribs. A traitorous physical reaction I could not control. Even after everything, even after the lawyers and the trust, and the weeks of mental preparation, seeing that name still triggered a child's instinct to brace for impact. I took a breath, holding it for a count of 3, and picked up the phone. Hello. Gemma. Her voice was different. Gone was the sugary concern, the feigned interest in my job or my life. Her tone was tight, clipped, stripped of all pleasantries. It sounded like she was reading from a script she did not like but was determined to finish. We need to talk. I leaned back in my chair, swiveling away from my computer screen so my coworkers would not see my face. Is everything okay? No, she said sharply. It is not. We have been looking over the numbers. Gemma? Your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. We cannot let this situation with the house drag on any longer. It is irresponsible. The word hung in the air. Irresponsible. It was their favorite weapon. If they could paint me as a chaotic, immature child, they could justify taking the reins. I kept my voice even, though my hand was gripping the phone tight enough to hurt. What situation, Mom? The bills are paid. The taxes are handled. There was a pause. A silence that felt heavy and rehearsed. Then she spoke, her voice dropping to a register that was meant to sound like pity. You think they are handled, sweetie. But you are drowning. We can see it. You are forgetting keys. You are evasive. You are clearly overwhelmed, and it is not fair to put that pressure on you. We are not going to stand by and watch you fail. I felt a cold flash of anger, but I swallowed it. This was the setup. They were rewriting reality to fit their narrative. So what are you saying? I asked. I am saying we need to settle this. Finally. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated against my ear. A text message. I pulled the phone away for a fraction of a second to check the notification. It was from Chloe. We are coming by this weekend. It is easier to explain in person. We have a solution. I stared at the screen. A solution. In my family, a solution never meant a compromise. It meant they had made a decision. And I was expected to align with it. The vague ominousness of the message was calculated. They wanted me to be anxious. They wanted me to spend the next 3 days wondering what they were planning, so that by the time they arrived, I would be so exhausted from worry that I would agree to anything just to end the tension. I put the phone back to my ear. Mom, I am working right now. Can we discuss this later? No discussion, she said, her voice hard. We will see you on Saturday morning. Be at the house. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. The silence that followed was deafening. My coworkers were still typing, still sipping coffee, oblivious to the fact that my entire world had just shifted axes. They were coming. And they were not coming to negotiate. I stood up and walked to the break room, my legs feeling slightly numb. I needed to make one call. Just one. I dialed the number I had memorized over the last 3 weeks. Arthur Vance answered on the second ring. Vance. It is Gemma, I said. They just called. They are coming on Saturday. There was a rustle of papers on the other end, then his calm, sandpaper voice. What was the tone? Aggressive, I said. They said they have a solution. They said they are not going to watch me fail. Vance hummed, a low sound of satisfaction. Good. Good, I asked, leaning against the counter. I felt like I was about to throw up. Yes, good, he said. It means they are confident. They believe the work is done. They have likely drafted papers. A quitclaim deed, perhaps, or a transfer agreement they will pressure you to sign. They are coming to ambush you, Gemma. Which means they are not looking for traps. He paused. Do exactly what we discussed. Go to the house. Be there when they arrive. Do not argue. Do not fight. Let them lay out their entire plan. Let them put the papers in front of you. And then? I asked. And then, he said, I will be there. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. The panic was receding, replaced by a strange, vibrating energy. It was adrenaline, pure and sharp. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew the script. I knew the players. And I knew the ending. I left work early. I went back to my apartment and packed a bag, not for a casual weekend trip, but for a siege. I packed comfortable clothes. I packed my notebook. And at the bottom of the bag, I packed the thin beige folder Vance had given me weeks ago. I drove down to the coast that evening. The drive was different this time. The last time I had made this trip, I had been running away, trying to escape the noise. Now, I was driving toward it. When I arrived, the house was dark. The ocean was invisible in the night, just a rhythmic roaring sound against the shore. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled of salt and lavender, the scent of my grandmother. I walked through the quiet rooms, turning on lights one by one. I went to the kitchen and made tea. I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the black water churn. My mother said they had a solution. My sister said it would be easier to explain in person. They were bringing their movers. They were bringing their guilt trips. They were bringing their assumptions that I was weak, that I was small, that I was theirs to command. Let them come. I took a sip of tea, the steam warming my face against the cold sea breeze. I was not afraid anymore. I was just waiting. The trap was dug. The spikes were sharpened. All that was left was for them to walk through the door. Saturday morning broke, with a sky the color of bruised iron. The ocean was flat and gray, moving with a heavy, sluggish rhythm that matched the knot in my stomach. I sat on the porch swing, a mug of cold coffee in my hands, watching the driveway. I had been awake since 5, dressed and waiting. I wore jeans and a dark sweater, clothes that felt like armor. I was not scrubbing floors. I was not baking bread. I was simply occupying the space. At 10 o'clock exactly, a black sedan turned off the main road. The tires crunched loud and violent against the gravel, shattering the coastal silence. It was my parents' car, but my sister was driving. She pulled up right to the edge of the grass, parking aggressively close to the porch stairs, as if the vehicle itself was trying to push the house backward. I did not stand up. I took a slow sip of my coffee, tasting the bitterness, and watched them emerge. Chloe stepped out first. She was wearing a trench coat belted tight at the waist and sunglasses, despite the overcast sky. She looked like she was arriving at a demolition site she had already purchased. My parents followed, unfolding themselves from the back seat. My mother, Elara, smoothed her skirt with nervous, jerky movements. My father, Marcus, adjusted his collar, staring at the roofline instead of me. They stood together for a moment, a unified front, shoulders touching. The wall. They walked up the steps. I could hear the distinct click of my sister's heels on the wood. When they reached the porch, they did not say hello. They did not ask how I was. They stopped 3 feet away, blocking the view of the ocean, looming over me while I sat. "We need to go inside," Chloe said. Her voice was flat, devoid of the sisterly chime she usually faked. It was a command. I stood up slowly, placing my mug on the railing. I did not invite them in. I simply turned and opened the door, walking into the living room. They followed, their presence instantly sucking the air out of the room. My mother refused to sit. She stood by the fireplace, her hands clasped in front of her like she was at a funeral. My father leaned against the doorframe, blocking the exit. Chloe marched to the center of the room and placed a thick leather portfolio on the coffee table. The silence stretched, tight and vibrating. I leaned against the back of the sofa, crossing my arms. I waited. Arthur Vance had told me to let them speak first. Let them dig the hole. Chloe unzipped the portfolio. The sound was like a zipper closing on a body bag. She pulled out a stack of documents, crisp and white, stapled with authority. "We have fixed it," she said. She did not look at me. She looked at the papers. We spent the last week with the family attorney, going over the estate structure. It was a mess, Gemma. Granddad left things in a state of chaos. But we cleaned it up. I looked at the papers. I could see the header upside down. Quitclaim deed. Transfer of ownership. "What did you fix?" I asked, my voice steady. My father spoke then, stepping away from the doorframe. We corrected an error in the logic of the will. He sounded reasonable, paternal, the voice of a man who believes he is doing the hard work so the women do not have to. "This property is a massive asset. Leaving it to one person, especially someone with your financial limitations, puts the entire family legacy at risk. If you default on taxes, we all lose the history." My mother chimed in, her voice trembling slightly. "We are doing this to protect you, sweetheart. You are barely making ends meet in the city. We know you are struggling. We see how overwhelmed you are. The key's the forgotten calls. You are drowning, and we are just throwing you a life raft. The narrative was complete. I was the incompetence. They were the saviors. And the price of salvation was the deed to the only home I had ever loved. Chloe tapped her manicured fingernail on the stack of papers. The house has been transferred into my name. I have the liquidity to manage the renovations and the taxes. Dad will manage the oversight. You will be compensated, of course. We set up a small stipend for you. Enough to cover your rent for a few months. A fresh start. She looked up at me then, taking off her sunglasses. Her eyes were hard, triumphant. It is cleaner this way. I looked at the trio. My sister, the thief. My parents. The accomplices. They truly believed this was over. They believed that by printing words on paper and speaking with authority, they could alter reality. They had convinced themselves that their greed was actually benevolence. And the most terrifying part was that had I not met Arthur Vance, had I not sat in that gray office 3 weeks ago, this would have worked. I would have believed them. I would have believed I was incompetent. I would have signed the papers just to make the disappointment in their eyes go away. But I had met Arthur Vance. And I knew something they did not. I looked at the papers again. I saw the lack of a legitimate county seal. I saw the rush job. I saw the desperation masked as power. You transferred it, I asked. Chloe nodded. It is done. The paperwork is filed. We just need your signature to acknowledge the change in occupancy. Occupancy, I repeated. My mother stepped forward, reaching out as if to touch my arm, then pulling back. We think it is best if you make a clean break. Staying here, it is just holding you back. You need to be in the city, focusing on your career. Chloe cut through the softness. You are out by Friday, there it was. The deadline. The eviction. We have a crew coming to clear out the old furniture, she continued. We are gutting the kitchen next week. So you need to have your personal things packed and gone. We figured giving you 5 days was generous. My father nodded. It is for the best, Gemma. You will thank us later. I looked at them. I studied their faces. Memorizing this moment. I wanted to remember exactly what they looked like when they thought they had crushed me. I wanted to remember the smug curve of Chloe's mouth, the relieved slump of my mother's shoulders, the arrogant tilt of my father's head. They were waiting for me to cry. They were waiting for me to beg, or scream, or argue. They were ready for a fight, because a fight meant they could crush me with logic and guilt. I gave them neither. I took a deep breath, letting the scent of the old house fill my lungs one last time. I felt the floorboards under my feet, solid and true. Okay, I said. The word hung in the air, simple and quiet. Chloe blinked. Excuse me. I said okay. I did not reach for the papers. I did not look at the stipend offer. I just stood there, hands loose at my sides, my face a mask of calm resignation. The tension in the room snapped. My mother let out a long, shaky breath. Oh, thank goodness. I told you she would understand. I told you she would see reason. My father smiled, a tight, thin stretching of his lips. Good girl. I knew you would do the right thing. Chloe looked suspicious for a second, her eyes darting over my face, searching for the sarcasm, the trap. But I gave her nothing. I was the furniture again. I was the invisible child. She relaxed, her shoulders dropping an inch. Good. Well, that was easier than I thought. She zipped the portfolio closed with a sharp finality. We will leave the boxes in the hallway. Make sure you take everything you want, because on Friday, whatever is left goes into a dumpster. I nodded. Understood. They did not stay for coffee. They did not stay to reminisce. They had what they came for, my submission. They turned as a group and walked out the door. I followed them to the porch. The air was still cold, still heavy with incoming rain. Chloe marched down the steps to the car, energized by the victory. We will be back on Monday with the movers, she called out over her shoulder, not even turning around. Just to get the big stuff. Be ready. My mother turned back once, offering a sad, pitying smile. "We love you, Gemma. This is a good thing." I watched them get into the car. I watched the sedan back out of the driveway. Gravel spraying under the tires. I watched them drive away, disappearing around the bend of the coastal road. They were celebrating right now. I could imagine the conversation in the car. They were praising themselves for being tough, for handling the difficult situation, for saving the family asset from the weak link. They thought the story was over. I stood alone on the porch. The wind picked up, rattling the wind chimes. Monday. They were coming back on Monday with movers. They were coming to gut the kitchen. They were coming to erase my grandparents' history and replace it with an open concept and white marble. I looked down at my hands. They were not shaking. I walked back inside and locked the door. I went to my bag and pulled out the beige folder. I opened it and looked at the date stamp from the county clerk. The blue ink of the notary, the irrevocable language of the trust. I did not need to pack. I did not need boxes. I picked up my phone and dialed Arthur Vance. "They were here," I said, and they presented me with a fake transfer. They gave me an eviction notice. "They are coming back on Monday with a moving crew." I could hear the smile in Vance's voice. "Monday. Excellent. I will be there," he said. "And Gemma?" "Yes? Do not unlock the door until I arrive." I hung up. I looked around the living room, at the worn armchair where my grandfather used to read, at the sun, bleached curtains my grandmother had sewn. "Okay." I whispered to the empty house. I went to the kitchen and made a fresh pot of coffee. I had 48 hours to wait. I would spend them sitting on the porch, watching the tide come in and go out. I would rest, because on Monday, the war would finally begin. And this time, I was not the one who was going to lose. Monday arrived with a heavy mist that clung to the pine trees surrounding the property. The air was damp and cold, but I was sweating. Not from fear, but from a strange, humming anticipation. I stood in the kitchen, watching the driveway through the sheer curtains. Mr. Vance had arrived 20 minutes earlier. He had parked his nondescript gray sedan behind the detached garage, out of sight. He was currently sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing a document, looking as calm as if he were waiting for a bus. The sound came first, the low, grinding gears of a heavy vehicle. Then, the crunch of gravel. A massive white box truck pulled into view, backing up toward the porch with a rhythmic beeping sound that felt like a countdown. My parents' car followed close behind, weaving around the truck to park on the grass again. Chloe jumped out. She was wearing work boots today, designer ones that looked pristine, and tight jeans. She looked like a general surveying a battlefield. She had already won. She waved at the movers, directing them toward the front steps. My father got out, looking energized, clapping his hands together. My mother looked anxious but resolved, carrying a box of heavy-duty trash bags. I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. Vance stood up from the table and followed me, stopping just in the shadow of the doorway, invisible from the driveway for a moment. "Okay, boys. Let's start with the living room furniture." Chloe shouted to the two men climbing out of the truck. "Everything goes. We are clearing it to the studs." She turned and saw me. She smiled, a bright, sharp thing. "Good morning, Gemma!" "You ready?" "We are on a tight schedule." I did not smile back. I stepped to the side. Arthur Vance stepped out into the light. He was wearing a charcoal suit that looked out of place against the weathered wood of the porch. He held the beige folder in his left hand. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the gathering on the lawn with an expression of mild boredom. The scene froze. One of the movers, a burly man with a clipboard, stopped halfway up the stairs. He looked from Chloe to Vance, sensing instantly that the dynamic had shifted. "Who is this?" my father asked, his voice booming with authority. "Gemma, we discussed this. No guests today." Vance spoke before I could. His voice was not loud, but it carried effortlessly over the idling engine of the truck. I am not a guest, Mr. Hawthorne. I am the legal representative for the Blackwood Coastal Trust. Chloe laughed. It was a nervous, jagged sound. The what? What are you talking about? I am here to inform you that you are trespassing on private property, Vance said evenly. He opened the folder. And to issue a formal cease and desist regarding the removal of any assets from this location. Trespassing, Chloe scoffed. She marched up the stairs, stopping 2 steps below the porch level, so she still had to look up at us. She waved her own folder. We have the deed. I own this house. My name is on the title. If anyone is trespassing, it is you. Vance looked down at her papers. I have seen your filing, Miss Chloe. It was submitted through an online express service on Friday afternoon. It has not been verified by the county clerk. It is a legal transfer, she snapped. It is a fraudulent instrument, Vance corrected, his tone dropping a degree in temperature. The deed you are holding attempts to transfer ownership from your late grandparents' estate directly to you. However, the estate no longer owns this property. My mother stepped forward, her face pale. What does that mean? Of course the estate owns it. No, Mrs. Hawthorne, Vance said. The property was transferred into an irrevocable trust 3 weeks ago. The deed was recorded, notarized, and filed with the county. The owner of this house is the trust. And the sole trustee is Gemma. Silence crashed down on the driveway. The mover with the clipboard slowly backed down the stairs. Lady, you said this was a clean out. It is, Chloe shrieked, her composure cracking. She is lying. She is trying to trick us? She turned to me, her face twisting into something ugly. You cannot do that. You cannot just put it in a trust without asking us. I said quietly. And I did. My father stormed up the stairs, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. Now you listen to me, young lady. You are going to undo this right now. You are going to sign whatever this man needs you to sign to dissolve this nonsense. We are your parents. We decide what happens to this family's assets. Vance stepped in front of me. It was a small movement, but it placed a suit of armor between me and my father's rage. Mr. Hawthorne, take a step back. You are aggressively approaching a trustee on her own property. I would advise you to be very careful. You are accusing us of fraud. My mother cried out, tears finally spilling over. We are just trying to help her. She cannot manage this place. The trust is fully funded, Vance said, checking a page in his folder. The taxes are paid for the next 5 years. The maintenance fund is secure. There is no mismanagement here. There is only an attempted theft. He looked at the movers. Gentlemen, if you remove so much as a light bulb from this house, you will be liable for theft of trust property. I have your license plate number. And I have the sheriff's department on speed dial. I suggest you leave. The movers did not hesitate. We are out, the big man said. He signaled his partner. We do not do domestic disputes, lady. Call us when you actually own the place. Wait, Chloe yelled, running after them. I am paying you double! Just get the furniture. The driver ignored her. He climbed into the cab, slammed the door, and threw the truck into reverse. The beeping sound started again, mocking the sudden collapse of their plan. We stood on the porch, watching the truck rumble away until it disappeared down the road. Then, my family turned back to me. The silence was gone. The shock was gone. Now, there was only betrayal. How could you? My mother whispered. She looked at me not with anger, but with a deep, horrified disappointment, as if I had stabbed her. We have done everything for you. We raised you. We loved you. And you go behind our backs. You steal the house from your sister. I did not steal it, I said. My voice was steady, clearer than it had ever been. I protected it. It was supposed to be mine, Chloe hissed. She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. Mom and Dad said it was mine. We had plans, Gemma! We were going to fix it up. We were going to make it something real. It is already real, I said. You are selfish, my father spat. He looked at me with pure disgust. You are a selfish, ungrateful child. After all the support we gave you. After we let you stay here? This is how you repay us? By locking us out. You were not locked out, I said. You were invited for dinner. You were welcome here, until you decided to take it. We were doing what was best for the family, he shouted. No, I said. I took a step forward, moving out from behind Vance. You were doing what was best for you. You needed the money. You needed the control. You never asked me what I wanted. You never asked if I could handle it. You just decided I was weak, and you moved in. I looked at Chloe. She was trembling. You told me I was out by Friday, I said softly. She glared at me, sniffing. So, I said, a small, sad smile touching my lips. You really think I would let that happen? The words hung in the damp air. My mother wiped her eyes. Fine. If this is how you want to play it. But do not expect us to come visiting. Do not expect us to bail you out when the roof leaks or the pipes burst. You are on your own, Gemma. Completely on your own. I know, I said. I have been on my own for a long time. I just finally got the paperwork to prove it. Vance cleared his throat. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and held it out to my father. What is this? My father snapped. A formal notice, Vance said. It outlines the boundaries of the trust. It also restricts access to the property to the trustee and invited guests only. As of this moment, you are not invited guests. My father stared at the paper, then at me. He crumpled it in his fist and threw it on the porch floor. Let's go, he growled to my mother. I am done looking at her. Dad, wait, Chloe pleaded. We can call another lawyer. We can fight this. It is an irrevocable trust, young lady, Vance said, his voice final. You can spend 10 years and $100,000 in probate court, but you will not break it. The house is gone. My father grabbed Chloe's arm, roughly pulling her toward the car. I said, let's go. My mother lingered for 1 second. She looked at me, waiting for me to crack. Waiting for me to apologize and fix it, like I always did. I held her gaze. I did not blink. She turned away, a sob catching in her throat, and walked to the car. They piled in, slamming the doors with a violence that shook the quiet morning. My sister reversed the car blindly, kicking up turf and gravel, spinning the wheels before catching traction and speeding away. I watched them go. I watched the red taillights vanish into the mist. The silence returned. But this time, it was not empty. It was heavy. It was absolute. Mr. Vance closed the folder. He bent down and picked up the crumpled paper my father had thrown. He smoothed it out against his leg and handed it to me. Littering, he said dryly. Technically another violation. I took the paper. My hands were finally shaking. Just a little. Are you all right, Miss Gemma? He asked. I looked at the empty driveway. I looked at the gray ocean churning beyond the trees. I felt a massive, hollowing ache in my chest, the space where my family used to be. But underneath it, there was something else. A foundation. A floor that would hold my weight. They are gone, I said. Yes, Vance said. They are. They are not coming back, I said. Unlikely, he agreed. Bullies rarely returned to the scene of a defeat. I took a deep breath, tasting the salt and the pine and the damp earth. It tasted like freedom. It tasted like survival. I am all right, I said. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. The fallout did not explode. It collapsed. I expected a storm of angry phone calls, a barrage of text messages, perhaps even a lawsuit filed out of pure spite. I braced myself for the noise of a family imploding. But the noise never came. Instead, silence descended over the coast. Thick and absolute. A week after the moving truck had rumbled away in defeat, a letter arrived in my mailbox. It was not from my parents, and it was not from Chloe. It was from their family attorney. It was brief, stiff, and unmistakably final. It stated that the Hawthorne family was withdrawing all claims regarding the property and requested that no further contact be made regarding the estate. I read it once. Standing by the kitchen island where my grandmother used to roll out pie crusts, I did not feel triumph. I did not feel the surge of adrenaline that comes with winning a fight. I just felt a quiet, settling weight in my chest, like a stone finding the bottom of a river. I filed the letter in the beige folder, right next to the trust documents. It was the final brick in the wall. The bridge was not just burned, it was dismantled. Stone by stone. For the next few days, I moved through the house like a ghost haunting her own life. I walked through the rooms, touching the surfaces that Chloe had wanted to rip out. I ran my hand along the floral wallpaper in the hallway. I sat on the worn velvet sofa in the living room. I opened the windows and let the salt air flush out the lingering scent of my sister's expensive perfume. The house felt different now. For years, it had been a sanctuary, a place to hide from the judgment of my parents. But even then, it had felt borrowed. It had felt like a place I was allowed to visit, but never truly inhabit. Now, the floorboards felt solid under my feet. The roof felt like it was actually protecting me. The space did not feel like a prize I had defended. It felt like a promise I had kept. On Sunday afternoon, I drove into town to buy groceries. I walked past the bakery, where my mother used to buy the coffee cake for Aunt Sarah. I walked past the real estate office, where my father had likely looked at comparable listings, calculating the fortune he thought he was owed. I saw people who knew my family, neighbors who had been at the funeral. A few of them looked at me with curiosity, perhaps having heard whispers of the scene on the driveway. I did not look away. I nodded to them, polite and calm, and kept walking. I was done explaining myself. I was done trying to manage the optics of a family that only cared about images. Let them talk. Let them paint me as the villain who stole the inheritance. I knew the truth. I knew that protecting yourself is not cruelty. It is survival. That evening, I made tea and went out to the porch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in strokes of violet and bruised orange. The tide was coming in, the waves crashing against the shore with a rhythmic, steady power that shook the ground beneath me. I sat in the rocking chair and listened to the wind chimes. They tapped together softly, a familiar, chaotic music that I had loved since I was a child. I thought about my parents. I wondered if they were sitting in their cold suburban living room, nursing their grievances, rewriting the story until they were the victims. I wondered if Chloe was already spinning a new narrative for her friends, a one where she was the martyr of a greedy sister. I realized then that I did not care. For the first time in my life, their opinion of me held no weight. I had spent 24 years shrinking, contorting myself to fit into the small, suffocating box they had built for me. I had starved myself of needs, so that they would not have to be inconvenienced. I had stayed silent so they could be loud. And it had never been enough. It would never have been enough. I took a sip of tea, the ceramic warm against my hands. The loss of my family was a heavy price to pay. I knew there would be moments in the future, holidays, birthdays, weddings, where the silence would hurt. I knew there would be days where I missed the illusion of belonging, even if it was a lie. But as I looked out at the darkening ocean, I knew I had made the only choice that mattered. I had chosen the reality of solitude over the fantasy of their love. I had chosen to be the villain in their story, so I could be the hero in mine. The wind picked up, smelling of pine and deep water. The house creaked behind me, settling into the evening chill. It was a sound that used to make me feel small, a reminder of the age and size of the place. Now, it sounded like a conversation. "I am here," the house seemed to say. "I am here," I whispered back. I stayed on the porch until the stars came out, bright and hard above the black water. I was alone. I was disowned. I was the girl who took up too much space. And for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I belonged.